Combat engineers build bridges in minutes, dig trenches and bunkers that defy enemy bombardment, and defuse deadly landmines. But ask any engineer why they really love their job, and the answer is always the same.
The coolest thing about being an engineer is just getting to blow things up.
It's fun to blow up things.
Engineers love their job because they get to blow things up.
They blast through walls, through minefields, through strongholds, and through any fortification that enemy can build. Take cover as we trace the evolution of the men who build with one hand and destroy with another. Combat engineers.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
It's time to go ballistic. Whatever the battle, whatever the situation, combat engineers always get there first. From building bridges to clearing through minefields. From digging tunnels to breaking down enemy defenses. It's a dirty job, and they have to do it all under enemy fire.
They break down barriers, they put up field fortifications, they bridge rivers. You really can't survive without them.
Today's U.S. combat engineer is a lethal fighting machine, equipped with some of the coolest military kit. He carries a lightweight M16 rifle alongside his entrenching tool. To blast through any barrier, he carries a pack of powerful C4 explosives. And to protect him against I.E.Ds, he drives a 22.5-ton Buffalo mine-protected clearance vehicle. Heavyweight kit.
Hey, what's that?
For a heavyweight unit.
No matter what the task may be, no matter how huge the mission may be, even if it sounds unaccomplishable, we will do it.
Now, Weaponology will unlock the combat engineer's family tree, traveling through history to trace the evolution of the world's most explosive corps of warriors. The global war on terror has taken U.S. troops halfway across the world. Where they go, so do the combat engineers. Given the task of rebuilding the infrastructure of Iraq and Afghanistan's fallen cities, most of their time is spent detecting, diffusing, or detonating I.E.Ds. Improvised explosive devices.
Prior to 9/11, the world of combat engineers was kind of centered around a lot of minefield emplacement, a lot of obstacle emplacement. Now it's a lot more dealing with improvised explosive devices.
A typical I.E.D. is made from artillery shells strapped together. Triggered remotely using mobile phones, the effects of the blast are devastating.
Whenever we would roll up on an I.E.D. that had gone off on an American patrol, the carnage is pretty severe.
For U.S. combat engineers, dealing with I.E.Ds isn't new. In Vietnam, they've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Fighting a desperate guerrilla war, the Viet Cong became masters of explosive improvisation. Even a U.S. soldier's ration tin could become a weapon against him.
Well, these ingenious Viet Cong, they would take these tins, these little cans, and they'd fill them full of explosive, and they would make their own landmines.
Better known as booby traps, these improvised explosive devices were primitive but deadly.
They set that thing about 2 or 3 feet below the surface of the road. They'd pack some C4 around it with a detonator, back off with the wires, and they'd hide in the brush. And when somebody comes along that they wanted to nail, they just touch the little wires to the battery.
IEDs made Vietnam uncomfortable for U.S. soldiers. 30 years later, in Iraq and Afghanistan, larger, more sophisticated IEDs would make life hell. By the end of 2007, IEDs had been the cause of 2/3 of all U.S. deaths in Iraq. Often placed on the curb of roads and disguised as boxes, drinks cans, or even plastic bags, spotting them is no easy task.
A lot of it's gut feeling. You see 2 boxes laying on the road, and one of them it just feels wrong, so we call it out.
Combat engineers have a hero in this hunt for IEDs, the Buffalo.
The Buffalo mine-protected vehicle gives us a way to clear an area and find out if we have a hidden bomb or if we just have a large pile of trash.
Weighing in at almost 23 tons, the Buffalo has a tough hide. Reinforced armor and toughened glass can withstand heavy blasts. Its crew sit 13 feet above ground, keeping them safe from landmines.
Roger, we're going to check this debris in the middle of the road here. It appears to be something that's falling off the truck.
The Buffalo is also fitted with a 30-foot articulated arm. Operated from inside the vehicle using cameras and monitors, it probes and detonates IEDs from a safe distance.
Go to your left a little bit.
Engineers scour the booby-trapped roads of Baghdad on a daily basis, looking for something suspicious or just out of place.
There's something in this bag.
Oh yeah, let's check that thing out.
You never know whether the next cardboard box or plastic bag is going to be a bomb or simply trash. But inside the Buffalo, the engineers don't need to worry which it will be.
We got IEDs detonated on us a number of times. We never once had a piece of shrapnel enter our vehicles. You would get superficial damage to windows, but the vehicles themselves kept the soldiers inside safe and secure.
Buffalo ready to roll.
The Buffalo has an awesome track record in detecting and disabling IEDs, but only one at a time. When you have an entire field of these devices to move through in a hurry, the Buffalo just isn't up to the job. Demo 6, part of the Marine Corps' combat engineers, are a unit that specializes in minefields and demolitions. Today, they have come across a small field of IEDs near a roadside in Iraq. From a safe distance, they tried to destroy the devices with heavy-duty machine gun fire. Some blow, but not enough. Demo 6 are gonna need something bigger. It's time to break out one of the engineers' coolest, fiercest, baddest bits of kit. The mine-clearing line charge, or the MIC-LIC.
The MIC-LIC was a rocket on the end of a rope made out of C4 explosive. And this would fire off, trail out behind it, land on the minefield, then it would be detonated. And the sympathetic detonation of the mines would occur, and you could clear a path through the minefield.
With 5 pounds of C4 explosive every foot, this bad boy blasts a mine-free path of over 328 feet.
Firing MIC-LIC is a really awesome spectacle to behold. Like the 4th of July here in the United States, when it's done, there's a lot less of what was in front of you than used to be.
The MIC-LIC's sheer power and ability to clear a path through a minefield in seconds makes it one of the engineer's favorite toys.
The MIC-LIC is probably the coolest thing I've ever seen.
It's really beautiful. Sexy as it gets.
Combat engineers' explosive expertise means they don't just defuse and detonate, they also destroy. Buildings, bunkers, barns, barriers. If it gets in the way, it's gone.
Engineers are builders and they're destroyers. And the easiest way to destroy something is to use explosives.
Knowing how much explosive to use, when and where, is a skill that few others but a combat engineer can be trusted with.
Explosives can seem very attractive. It's a big bang, it's spectacular, there's flames and smoke and stuff. Actually, it's a very precise art, and one of the things an engineer learns is to use them economically to achieve an exact intention.
Very often, these explosive skills are used in gaining entry to buildings. Blowing off a door lock or blasting a window frame requires a subtle touch. Too much force could result in unnecessary deaths. Too little force, and the building won't be breached.
The upper echelon of combat engineers, they need to do this very fast and very efficiently. They also need to be very close to the door. If this is a very small room, we can't afford to have to put an explosive on here that we have to clear the building in order to blow through this one barricaded door.
The amount used and the placement of the plastic explosive is crucial.
We're going to come in here and approach this as close as we can right into this crevice. It's very important that if you look at where the actual explosive charge is, we want to make sure this is put in the right place.
By detonating the locking mechanism, the door will be breached using a minimal amount of explosive.
And then ignite.
Perfectly executed. The door has been breached, but the building structure is not compromised.
That was a great positive breach. We haven't endangered ourselves or the other people here, but we've defeated the connection between the door and the door frame, and that's what allows us to move through. So you can actually see pieces of that mechanism that holds the door into the door jamb all here put together.
Combat engineers stare terror in the face every day. When the lead flies, you're supposed to keep a steady hand. But when you're inches away from some of the most dangerous weapons on the planet, even these guys break a sweat.
This bounds up about waist level, and then it explodes. And it's very, very nasty indeed.
Combat engineers are the masters of disaster. Stepping in when everything seems lost, they build, destroy, delay, and defuse. It's a complex role, a role that demands a whole lot of brawn and a whole load of brain.
Engineers are the Army's innovators and improvisers.
Everywhere they go, they're dealing with a different environment, they're dealing with a different enemy.
These are the guys who can take a very basic bit of kit and use it imaginatively.
You have to just kind of make it up as you go along.
Rewind to World War II, and one man thinking outside the box is British engineer Jasper Maskelyne.
I'll just take my meds.
Jasper Maskelyne was a magician before the war. The skill he had to offer was his knowledge of deception, the skills of a stage magician. And he brought these to bear in North Africa in an enormously imaginative and constructive way.
1942. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps and Allied troops are in a standoff near the small railway town of El Alamein in northern Egypt. British General Bernard Montgomery wants the Germans to think his attack will be coming from the south. In fact, he'll be coming from the north. To pull this off, the British will need to create a ghost army in the south. Jasper Maskelyne, the former magician, takes the stage.
Maskelyne's part in the Battle of Alamein was to create this entirely fictional build-up, giving the German air photo interpreters the kind of images they would recognize as being a logistic and military build-up to the south.
German aerial reconnaissance has to be fooled. The con is on. Act 1. Maskelyne builds dummy tanks and artillery positions out of plywood and painted canvas. He builds fake supply lines and transmits radio communications, suggesting entire British battalions are stationed in the south, ready to attack. Act 2 of Maskelyne's great illusion requires even greater sleight of hand. He's got to make 1,000 British tanks stationed in the north vanish. Turning again to wooden canvas, he disguises them as trucks. The question is, will German observation planes buy this deception? You bet they do. Rommel builds up his army in the southern sector, leaving his northern flank dangerously vulnerable. On October 23, 1942, the British launched their attack. A massive artillery barrage, 800 guns firing 600 shells each. The Germans didn't know what hit them. Jasper Maskelyne has pulled off his greatest trick. The Allies have the advantage, but the battle for El Alamein isn't over yet. To get at the Germans, the Allied forces still need to cross the Devil's Gardens, a 40-mile belt of landmines, 3 million plus, just waiting to be tripped. Landmines are the engineers' deadliest enemy. Their origins can be traced back to China, but it was in the American Civil War that operational landmines became a major feature. The Siege of Yorktown, 1862. Confederate General Gabriel Rains plants 10-inch artillery shells just below the surface of the ground. If trodden on, they'll detonate. The Civil War, it ain't so civil.
When Rains withdrew his brigade, he left landmines on the road approaching the fort, and his men left some by the guns and in some other places.
Without any way of seeing these devices, Union troops sustained 4 deaths and many more casualties. Ironically, a metal detector which could have found the mines was invented just 19 years later. Its first use came in 1881, when President James Garfield was shot.
The first attempt to use metal detection occurred during the assassination attempt of President Garfield here in the U.S. They brought in Alexander Graham Bell to try and find the bullet before it killed the president.
When Bell tested his new metal detection invention on the president, he was stunned. The device seemed to be detecting metal all over the president's body. Convinced his invention had been a failure, he abandoned its development. The president died of his wounds on September 19th. But Bell's metal detector had actually worked. It was correctly sensing another little-known modern invention, the metal coil-sprung mattress the president was lying on. Fast forward to World War II, and the metal mine detector is now a crucial bit of kit in every engineer's locker. One of their primary jobs is to detect landmines. No easy task. These devices have become lethally sophisticated. The small German S-mine, S for shrapnel, is particularly unpleasant.
They were really beastly little things, and they were much more difficult to find.
You notice that it has these 3 prongs. So what you did was you buried this in so that only those 3 prongs stick above the ground.
And what usually happened was you kicked one of these prongs by mistake, and that set the mine off.
Nicknamed the Bouncing Betty, the S-mine would launch into the air at waist height and explode. Designed to maim, not kill, it shredded limbs and genitals.
So this bounds up about waist level, and then it explodes. And these ball bearings that are all the way around come flying out. And it's very, very nasty indeed.
Crude but hugely effective, landmines were now a crucial weapon. In North Africa, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had invested in them wholesale. 3 million devices just waiting to go boom.
Rommel ordered his pioneers and his Italian engineers to begin laying what he called Devil's Gardens.
They were an elaborate network of mines, charges, booby traps, which would slow down the most ruthless enemy.
In the final stage of the Allied assault on El Alamein in Egypt, British engineers with metal detectors will be asked to clear a path through the Devil's Gardens.
The first guys to advance into German lines were the engineers sweeping for the mines, an extremely hazardous and very difficult job.
Rommel's artillery starts targeting the exposed engineers. They're hanging in the wind, stood up, no cover, sucking up lead.
You have to wave the detector, rather like a scythe, to and fro in front of you on the ground. But you've got to stand up to do it. And that makes you a very easy target for the enemy.
To beat the Devil's Gardens, the British engineers must find other ways of clearing a path. First, they send in specially designed flail tanks that detonate mines without exposing the crew to lethal lead. Second, engineers ditch their metal detectors and turn the clock back to an older, safer method of mine detection.
A much better way is to crawl on your stomach on the ground, where you're much, much safer, and poke about with spikes.
Brave engineers eventually cleared a safe path through the gardens. British tanks punched through and defeated the Germans. El Alamein became a crucial Allied victory. Engineers are explosive. Landmines, I.E.Ds, MICLICs. They've kinda got a short fuse. But engineers are also natural diplomats. They build and mend bridges anytime, anywhere. Just don't lend them your speedboat.
You point at your target, open up the throttle. The thing screams towards your target, hits it, and explodes.
Combat engineers are kings of construction. Armed with diggers, spades, wrenches, and power tools, they build roads, clear runways, establish hospitals, provide water and electricity. A lot of the time, they do it under fire. It's an elite job. And when you're talking about building bridges, it's a tough one too.
Those who are practitioners of warfare have had to deal with rivers. It's been a task, it's been a challenge for organized armies for 3,000 years.
Throughout history, bridges have been the most fought-over structures on the battlefield. The enemy will fight tooth and nail to disable them, turn them to ruins, or blow them to pieces. In World War II, the Germans, Italians, and Japanese all employed explosive motorboats as a technique to destroy Allied bridges.
You point at your target, open up the throttle, you nip off the back in your scuba kit. The thing screams towards your target, hits it, and explodes.
When the resulting gap needs to be crossed, it's the engineers who step in. Building bridges is the engineer's greatest skill. In World War II, they will be one of the busiest elite units. Europe's battlefields are laced with small, fast-flowing rivers. Many of the crossings have been destroyed. Allied engineers now need a light, portable bridge that can take the strain of heavy armor.
Anyone who could develop a bridge that would carry the heavy weight, but could essentially be assembled by hand, that would be the magical mousetrap that the world would be the path to your door.
The solution came from an unlikely source. A British civil servant called Donald Bailey. Bailey was working at an experimental bridging establishment, overseeing engineers' efforts to come up with a new bridge. Returning home from witnessing another failed attempt, he had a flash of inspiration.
Donald Coleman Bailey, returning from a failed bridge test, he sketched out the Bailey Bridge on the back of an envelope.
Bailey's new bridge was an evolution in design. A vision of flat-pack simplicity. It could support tanks across 200 feet of water. All you needed to erect it were some wrenches and a few engineers.
The Bailey Bridge is a prefabricated bridge, and it could be broken down into parts, trucked to a site, and then reassembled in a big hurry.
The bridge's utility would soon be tested. Italy, 1944, and Allied forces are fighting the Germans at Monte Cassino. British engineers are given the task of building a Bailey Bridge to get tanks and artillery across the fast-flowing River Rapido.
Come on! Come on!
The site is an inferno of fire and smoke. But the order has come through that this bridge must be built at all costs. As night falls, heavy fire from snipers and mortars rains in.
As the bridge lorries bringing the bridge parts to the site began rolling up, the enemy started shelling the bridge site and making it almost impossible to get anything done.
The men were being picked off one by a sniper located just yards away.
There was a German probably 50 or 60 yards away, and he kept firing, but he couldn't see. He kept firing indiscriminately.
Men were being wounded, and the bridge couldn't be finished. The sniper had to be silenced. An engineer stepped forward.
Sergeant Parry volunteered to go forward with a brain gun and eliminate this German gunner, which he did very successfully.
The sniper fell silent. The engineers finished the job. The Bailey Bridge across the Rapido was not just a turning point for the battle at Monte Cassino, but for the war in Italy. Later, American President Eisenhower would acclaim it as one of the pieces of equipment that most contributed to the victory in Europe.
Bailey Bridge was one of the most incredible engineering feats of World War II.
Fast forward to the Vietnam War, where U.S. engineers had developed something the troops in World War II could only have dreamed of: a self-launching bridge. The AVLB, or Armored Vehicle Launching Bridge, was based on a tank chassis. A bridge layer unfolds and launches its bridge, a process that takes only minutes.
You're coming forward in your tanks, you've hit a blown bridge, bring up the AVLB, down goes this bridge, your tanks keep moving. There's none of this business of bringing up bits and building a bridge. It's quick, it's reliable, and it allows the momentum of an armoured attack to be sustained.
The AVLB has another surprise. It doesn't allow the enemy to escape. Once all of the vehicles have been moved across, it reattaches to the bridge from the other side and retracts the span.
The whole idea was being able to drive up, unfold this bridge, let everyone race across, then go across it, pick it up, and carry it with you.
The AVLB's success in Vietnam has pointed the way forward. And in the 21st century, longer, lighter bridges are taking the strain in Iraq and Afghanistan. Combat engineers are like a pro football team. Good on offense, big on defense. On the battlefield, this could mean digging deep underground and duking it out with spades and shovels.
Hand-to-hand fighting took place using picks, shovels, and the other tools of the mining trade.
When the enemy's at the gates, the best way to fortify your position is to call the combat engineers and dig in. Going underground with trenches, bunkers, and tunnels, combat engineers keep armies safe from small arms fire and artillery blasts. Rewind to World War I, and trenches had become a key feature of warfare and of combat engineering. Constructed using wood, entrenching tools, and a whole load of elbow grease, they offered much-needed protection.
Trench warfare didn't come into being with the First World War. What was new about the First World War was the extent and the duration of trench warfare.
More than just a hole in the ground, these trenches were built to exact specifications and designs to ensure they were as effective a defensive fortification as possible.
It's a misconception to think that the trenches of World War I were something relatively rudimentary, kind of holes in the ground. They were actually a complex system of trenches, frontline trenches, second-line trenches, communications trenches. People worked out that you needed to have angles in the trenches so that you couldn't just fire straight down a trench and so on.
The Germans added further refinements to their trenches. Bunkers, sometimes 3 stories deep, gave their soldiers increased protection from artillery.
They dig deep underground shelters, and a lot of the shells that got fired at them were simply too light to make much difference.
During the Battle of the Somme, the German defenses would be put to the ultimate test. The British started a week-long bombardment of the German lines. 1,738,000 shells were fired at their trenches. It was a stunning failure.
When the barrage lifted and rolled away through the German position, the attacking infantry found that they were going to be faced with Germans who'd escaped unscathed from the bombardment, who came up from these deep defenses and took them on.
Almost 20,000 British soldiers died in a hail of bullets and shrapnel. Now, Allied engineers had to come up with a plan that would put the German trenches out of action. The solution was simple. If they couldn't destroy the Germans from above, they destroy them from below. Specially selected coal miners were drafted into the engineers. Working round the clock, they shifted millions of tons of soil.
Both sides, but the Allies in particular, were digging deeper tunnels under the opposing lines to fill them with explosives and then to set them off.
It was dirty, dangerous work. And when German and Allied tunnels collided, it got even dirtier. Engineer versus engineer, grappling with knives and pickaxes in a fight to the death.
There were occasions when mines coming from one side ran into mines going the other way, and on those occasions hand-to-hand fighting took place using picks, shovels and the other tools of the mining trade.
Combat engineers had become subterranean assassins. Survival was all that counted in this underground hell.
It is claustrophobic, dark, dirty, and frightening to a degree which you cannot imagine, because within touching distance can be death just around the corner.
On June 7th, 1917, the largest military mining operation in history was about to come to a head. Messines Ridge, France. The British have put over 600 tons of explosives under the German positions. 3:10 in the morning was designated 0 hour, when all hell would break loose.
The charges were in place, the cables had been run back, the engineers had withdrawn, officers looked at their watches, they counted down to 03:10, and then simultaneously they fired the charges.
The combined sound of the simultaneous mine explosions comprises the loudest man-made explosion ever felt to that day.
These were so big that they registered as earthquakes and were probably the biggest man-created explosion until the atomic weapon.
Towns and cities across Europe were rocked by the blasts.
People in Lille, the nearest big town, were thrown out of bed by it. And in London, people heard the bang.
In the initial blast alone, over 10,000 Germans were killed. Engineers had just proved their weight in guts and dynamite. Fast forward to the Vietnam War, where Viet Cong engineers were about to stun the world with their own military mining tactics.
These tunnel complexes are like anthills. The level of tunneling was one of the big surprises of the Vietnam War.
During the war, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong engineers constructed over 300 miles of connected tunnels. Hidden by tons of soil and a jungle canopy, they were hugely sophisticated.
They had storage areas, they had arms room areas, classrooms, sleeping quarters. They had hospitals under there, everything.
In 1966, a unique team known as the Tunnel Rats was formed. Their job, crawl into tunnels and flush the Viet Cong out.
Searchers, nicknamed Tunnel Rats, prepare to descend into the caverns 15 feet underground.
Tunnel Rats were American troops whose role in life was to go down tunnels and take the Vietnamese on. This was a horrific job because the defender had many of the advantages.
They were famed for their bravery and their dark sense of humor. Their motto, non gratum anus rodentum, translates as not worth a rat's ass.
A tunnel rat was generally a person in the unit crazy enough to crawl in this little dark space. It was just who would do it.
This mission would be no walk in the park.
You would start crawling in very slowly. You had a flashlight, a pistol, and a bayonet. I learned very quickly not to look up that much because I'm scared to death of spiders, and they were all over the roof.
Spiders weren't the worst of it. The Viet Cong booby-trapped their tunnels. Tripwires, bamboo spikes. It was a hellhole.
The tunnels that I come across were very well concealed. When you opened one, there was something inside waiting for you.
Even if they survived the booby traps, their weapon, the .45 caliber pistol, was certain to give them one hell of a headache.
Under normal circumstances, the Tunnel Rats were armed with a .45 caliber pistol and a flashlight. Problem: if you fire a .45 caliber pistol inside a tunnel, the decibel level will blow your drums out. Consequently, other small arms were used, one of which was this. This is the Quiet Special Purpose Revolver.
Small, light, and with barely any recoil, the specially modified Smith & Wesson 29 used a .410 shotgun shell. Hugely effective in a tight space, and not so deafening.
If you fire a .410 shotgun inside a tunnel, you only bleed from the ears. Big step up.
Tunnel Rats weren't the only weapons in the tunnel war. Flamethrowers, gas, water, explosive, napalm. U.S. engineers tried every material and weapon at their disposal to blast the Vietnamese out of the ground.
We would set TNT and C4 explosives and back off and hit the little old crank generator deal and watch it go blow. We had a good time blowing things up. Everybody got off on that.
Incredibly, the tunnel stood up to almost everything the engineers threw at them. And when they didn't, the Viet Cong grabbed their shovels and dug another.
The Vietnamese tunnel system is an example of a static defense that worked, that the Americans could never really penetrate.
With all the technology we had, that technology did not defeat their tunnels.
Digging deep kept the communists alive. America couldn't kill an army it couldn't find. Once again, engineers had won the day. Going underground keeps soldiers safe. Up above, there's no cover. That's why for centuries, armies have relied on fortifications to defend troops. Made of stone and concrete, engineers build them and bust them. Combat engineers build with one hand and destroy with the other. They'll put up a bridge, then blast it to hell. Rebuild a town, then burn it down. Construction to destruction in the blink of an eye. This cycle goes right back to the origins of combat engineers. Rewind to World War II, when sides were tasked with building fortifications. Most of the time, this meant bunkers and pillboxes. These reinforced concrete structures house men, machine guns, and artillery.
Any bunker is going to be designed to resist a certain amount of firepower. And the bigger and thicker it is, the heavier the firepower that it'll be able to shrug off. So it'll need slits for vision and slits for fire. Typically, these are going to be relatively small and usually splayed out to enable the person inside to have the widest possible field of fire, but to try and make it difficult for incoming fire to get into the bunker.
In World War II, bunkers and pillboxes were built by engineers from all sides. The job of destroying these concrete castles would also be theirs.
If you're the attacking infantry, two people you'll turn to are the gunner, who'll try and crack them with artillery fire, and the engineer, who'll get in close to try to blow them up.
It was a mission only the bravest man would take on. Carrying satchels packed with explosives on a short fuse, they would have to get close to the bunker without being shot.
When the attacker gets right up close, he's going to need more than simple human courage to deal with the monster. Things he'll use will be a grenade or perhaps a satchel charge, particularly if he's an engineer. And then finishes up attacking the surviving occupants.
The vulnerability of pillboxes and other static positions became obvious in World War II. The French and Germans built massive defensive fortifications. Dotted with bunkers and pillboxes, the Maginot Line and Atlantic Wall seemed impregnable. So did the Belgian fortress I.E.D. Built by engineers in 1931, it defended their border with Germany. It had 17 bunkers, underground quarters for over 1,000 men, retractable cupolas, 3.5 miles of interlocking tunnels.
I.E.D was state-of-the-art, it was high-tech. It was reckoned to be impossible to take.
Impossible till an engineer gets on the case. May 10th, 1940. In a plan personally devised by Hitler, an elite group of German combat engineers are landed by glider right on top of I.E.D. Using flamethrowers and newly invented shaped charges, they bust their way into the fortress.
They used their specialist engineering skills to blow holes in the fort, to destroy the gun emplacements, and fight their way through and defeat the garrison of the fort.
Belgium's mighty I.E.D. had been defeated. 1 month later, the French Maginot Line also fell. Larger and more heavily defended than the Belgian fortress, the Germans didn't attack it. They just went round it. Military tacticians and engineers finally accepted the obvious. In a fluid war dominated by fast-moving armor and air power, large static defenses didn't work. Something better was needed. A portable system capable of defending troops on the move.
Back when I was a young private, we used to use sandbags for pretty much everything. Nowadays, we moved from sandbags to the Hesco Bastion.
Invented by a former English coal miner in the late 1980s, the Hesco Bastion is a collapsible wire mesh container with a heavy-duty liner. It can be filled with sand, stacked up to build a defensive wall, and used as a temporary blast barrier.
Hesco Bastions are very cool, very cool. As you can see, I'm 6'3", and these Hesco Baskets are taller than me. We use our engineering equipment to put earth inside of them, and then after that, they become very, very effective.
Sandbags take soldiers hours to fill. Hesco Bastions can be filled by machine in minutes. Where a sandbag is only effective against small arms fire, a Hesco Bastion can take on truck bombs, RPGs, and even 20,000-pound charges. Unlike traditional sandbags, rain and water won't compromise their effectiveness.
When mortars come in and you're behind a Hesco Bastion, you don't have to worry about any shrapnel coming through them. They are very effective on the battlefield. I trust them.
Just like Hesco Bastion, combat engineers are tough and adaptable. Jack of all trades and masters of guns, they'll think out of the box and stick the enemy in one. Drawn together, the branches of the combat engineer family tree reveal their unique genesis. From digging tunnels beneath enemy lines to building bridges under a torrent of enemy fire. And from detecting mines in World War II to staring down I.E.Ds on the streets of Baghdad. They are the most explosive unit on Earth. They are combat engineers.